The grand mansion shudders under the clash of swords. Inside, a woman kneels in relentless prayer. She begs the all-knowing, generous Para to take her into his arms without pain and let her finally depart this world. Edel Lancaster clung to her faith in divine providence, determined to endure. But the gates had already been thrown open. The pain, though brief as a whisper of wind, left its mark. Yet patience bore sweet fruit indeed. The knights were ordered to hunt her down. Only one room remained. As the door splintered, the heroine saw a sea of knights led by a man in a crimson cloak. She sat calmly at the center of the room, waiting for them. No fear flickered in her eyes. The knights smirked. Rumors hadn't lied. This woman was a true beauty. Even amidst the chaos, she carried herself like a duchess. The man in the crimson cloak addressed Duchess Edel Lancaster. His dark hair was trimmed short, with a faint shadow of stubble on his jawline. Edel asked, voice flat with indifference, if he was going to execute her on the spot. But the Count had to take her alive by the Emperor's orders. The heroine wondered when everything went sideways. Sitting in that old battered chair and confessing her guilt, she pondered noble honor and pride. Edel had been putting up with all this stupidity for such petty crap, but even her death wasn't hers to claim. Once the flawless Lady Edel Lancaster, admired by all 3 years ago, she briefly became the Duchess of Lancaster. The ladies had thought the engagement was disgusting from the start. The Lancasters were one of the 4 most powerful families in the empire. But marrying an old duke? That was just horrifying. And the aristocrats gossiped about it endlessly. But Edel didn't budge. Most had no idea what she was really thinking. There are 4 incredibly powerful families in the empire, and Edel had been raised and groomed to marry into one of them. Now, she'd finally fulfilled her purpose. Who'd ever think Edel would become the thread tying 2 families together? But the Duke's treacherous plan made her a traitor's wife. Now the Emperor was thrilled to finally claim the war's ultimate prize. The Duke's second wife was now at his mercy. She'd been raised her whole life for one purpose. Edel collapsed where she stood, too terrified to run. Couldn't even stomach the idea of dying on the floor, so she dragged over an old chair to sit on. The nobles wasted no time begging His Majesty to hand the traitress over to them. They suggested letting the old widower off easy, decide the prisoner's fate with a duel so someone could claim this beauty. Guess no one here had any dignity left. Now Edel Lancaster was nothing but a slave. Great Emperor Demarcus Tuberin raised a crystal glass of fine red wine and laughed heartily. He almost forgot about the rebellion's top hero. The Emperor asked Lazlo if he wanted her. If Count Lazlo wanted her, the Emperor could hand over the war's biggest prize. But the man's face stayed dead serious. Lady Edel married the wrong guy. Now she's fallen. People didn't get why the Emperor wanted to hand the war's biggest trophy to a commoner. From what the heroine could recall, the Count used to be a mercenary. But now he didn't look any different from any other knight. Lazlo ran the biggest mercenary guild in the empire. He was the guy who became a count at 27, thanks to his military accomplishments for the great empire. To the old-blooded nobility, Lazlo was the biggest threat. Among the emperor's new nobles, he was seen as the most dangerous. But the noblemen who saw mercenaries as scum looked down on him and treated him like dirt. Now Lazlo was staring at the prisoner with cold eyes. The heroine turned her gaze away. The Count told His Majesty he wasn't buying the offer. Edel's eyes went wide when he added, totally indifferent, that his estate was short on maids. The Emperor burst out laughing at the idea of Lazlo trying to turn a former duchess into a maid. But the Count didn't have a better use for her. Demarcus Tuberin gave it his approval. He handed Edel Lancaster over to Count Lazlo as his maid in front of everyone. Was this really it? Was this her reward for all the patience? Edel's mom told her to stop arguing with their dad. But the girl didn't want to marry some guy older than her father. Her mom reasoned there was no better match. This man already had a mistress and grown kids. After his death, Edel could inherit a fortune. But Edel just didn't get it at all. Becoming a duchess in one of the empire's most powerful families would give her so much power. Even her own dad would have to bow. Edel's eyes went wide. She begged her father to listen, but he saw it as a disgrace. His daughter didn't want to fight for her family, which had already been through hell to make this happen. The Count had done so much for someone as useless as her. Tears welled up in Edel's eyes. But this was her way out. Escape a man like him. Leave the Canyon Count's house for good. Only that thought kept her going, but she always had to hear the sneers and cruel words behind her back. She was stuck managing dozens of accounting books and 100 servants, but she kept putting up with it. Edel took guests every day and hosted endless receptions. Took it without blinking an eye once. Pulled off her act with a smile on her face every time, all for that one shot at freedom, until the butler burst in and told her to run. That's when Edel found out the Imperial army was on its way. Now she knew the secret plan had gone south. Our heroine bolted down the massive empty corridor, servants nowhere to be seen. Then it hit her. She'd been nothing but bait to hold up the knights. She had dreamed of a different life, one filled with warmth and real human kindness. But no matter how much Edel had given this duchy, only the butler had told her to run. She became the perfect lady, just like her father wanted. Maybe all that pain was a sign from the heavens. They called her a trophy, but deep down, she was just a slave. Even though the Empire had done away with slavery centuries ago, the Duke of Lancaster's daughters were furious she still kept up the noble act. Lady Lorraine, the eldest daughter, hated this high and mighty woman. The younger sister, Daria Lancaster, snapped that she'd been this way since day one. They were convinced Edel's ex-mother-in-law had been secretly helping Count Canyon, and Edel had to sit there and take it in silence. The girl called her an ungrateful brat. Hearing sneering wasn't new, but this kind of outright rudeness from the Duke's daughters? That was a first. Guess they just got tired of fighting and gave up. Edel didn't want to waste energy on pointless bickering. There'd be a moment when the guards let their guard down, so the main character had to save her strength. For death, at least. Better to die than live as some pawn? Count Chrysus said he'd make her his servant, but a young prisoner couldn't expect decent treatment from people stronger than her. Even though Edel was a prisoner, they put her in a decent cell. Still, her whole body ached and her head throbbed. The main character decided to catch some sleep, hoping a good idea would come to her after. She had to figure out how to end her life. The night passed, and the sun began rising again over the castle's towering spires and thick stone walls. Edel slowly opened her eyes and sat up. Exhausted as she was, she woke up at her usual time. According to the Emperor's orders, the heroine was finally being handed over to Count Chrysus today, so she had to find a way to die, fast. That made this her last morning alive. The blue light streaming through the cell window seemed to say goodbye, casting a soft glow over the cold stone room. The sky looked stunningly beautiful today. Her last meal was lavish for a convicted criminal. As the Duke's daughters were ordered out of the dungeon, the heroine silently prayed they'd come through this okay. Then the guard stepped aside and let Edel out too. Even in her final moments, she held her head high. The moment she stepped outside, sunlight spilling across the earth, the heroine made up her mind. She'd just leap from the carriage. It just might work. If I'm lucky, death'll be instant. The heroine was counting on some greenhorn servant showing up so she could pull off her plan for sure. But all her hopes went down the drain the second Edel laid eyes on the Count. Now she finally got just how helpless she really was. That fancy carriage, all shiny with intricate carvings and gleaming metalwork, was racing down the road full speed. Lazlo stood there, arms crossed, staring out the window. She hadn't expected him to show up in person. She figured he'd just send someone to tail her, maybe even try chatting her up later. She knew for sure he couldn't stand her. Out of nowhere, the Count peeled off his red coat and tossed it to the heroine. She had no clue why he did it, so Lazlo told her to quit shaking already. Edel hadn't even realized she was. Holding it close, she started thinking, if she flung this coat at him, maybe she could buy herself a few seconds to leap out of that moving carriage. Then, under the wheels of some passing carriage, it'd all finally be over. The sound of a carriage pulling up was already audible. On 3, she decided to open the door and leap. So she started a mental countdown. But the Count said coldly, "Don't even think about it." Edel was stunned. This guy knew everything. That's why he'd joined her in the carriage. Now, the protagonist was sure he wouldn't let her go. By dusk, they arrived at their destination. Lazlo was the first to step out of the carriage. The protagonist stared at the place that would become her new hell, the place she'd be stuck living from now on. The Count watched her, waiting for her to step out. Edel took a step and immediately felt a sharp pain in her ankle. Losing her balance, the young woman began to fall. No way to catch herself, but she never hit the ground. Edel didn't catch on right away that she was in his arms. Lazlo caught her, something the protagonist hadn't seen coming, leaving her emotions all over the place. Her eyes widened instantly. She was taught a lady should always act proper, and falling into someone's arms was just plain rude. She immediately pulled away, hoping the Count wouldn't take it the wrong way, and quickly asked for his forgiveness. Lazlo yanked his hand back. He strode toward the manor and barked, "Follow me!" Lazlo marched inside and snapped at the headmaid. "Everything under control while I was gone?" A woman's voice chimed in instantly. The headmaid said the estate was in good hands. Nothing to worry about. Edel raised an eyebrow. Where the hell was the butler? The Count had remembered she was understaffed, so he brought in some extra hands and told her to assign them where needed. But first, she had to freshen up and rest in the designated room. Work could start tomorrow. Edel blinked. Why wasn't she getting the sleep with me order? Turns out he actually hired her as a maid. A maid named Mina rushed over to Lady Beauchamp and whispered she'd gotten some info from the knights. It turned out she was the disgraced Duchess of Lancaster. The lead maid's eyes popped in shock. Who would have thought they'd have a real-life duchess under their direct command now? Lady Bohyan quickly told Min to take that woman to the farthest room. Meanwhile, the head maid decided to mull over where to assign such a cutie. They were pretty kind, bringing Edel food and even spare clothes. Now the heroine was stuck living in a tiny room. The whole situation said she wasn't a noble anymore. Edel was freezing and figured the staff here probably didn't get hot water. She'd have to wash in cold water even during the harshest winters. That was weird. Count's finances shouldn't be that bad, right? But Edel decided not to dwell on it. Right now, best to focus on her new life. It was kinda surprising, and a little ironic, that despite the mess, the heroine still felt like eating. Tasted good. Edel hadn't expected to eat fruit again. The main character wanted to die, just to avoid becoming some guy's toy for his dirty fantasies. Maybe she'd get lucky, and Count Lazlo would leave her alone. Edel just wanted to live in peace and savor the sweetness of fruits. But it was far from clear if she'd actually managed to live a humble life as a common maid. Now, Edel had to survive. And maybe then, peace would finally settle in her soul. Advisor, with a grave expression, reported to His Majesty that Count Lazlo had taken the prisoner today. But the Emperor wasn't the least bit surprised. He was curious to hear the advisor's take on it. Demarcus Tuberin asked if Count Lazlo looked satisfied, but the advisor, flustered, admitted he wasn't sure. No one else even suspected Lazlo's true nature. He struck a deal with the Emperor to join the Imperial Guard. Though Lazlo joined purely for the reward, his mercenary army won countless battles, so the Emperor let him ask for anything he wanted. But Lazlo stated he only wanted the reward specified in their contract. That fearless, arrogant edge made him the perfect candidate for the Emperor's faithful hound. But to tame a hunting hound, you need the perfect bait. A title alone wouldn't be enough. As soon as Lazlo became a count, all the nobles started whispering, annoyed with the king's choice. They didn't get their ruler's move. At that party, Lazlo was the main guy no one wanted to talk to. But the Emperor noticed the count's eyes stayed locked on just one woman all night. Definitely Edel Lancaster. The dice are cast. Now all they can do is watch. Lazlo was beyond mad. Couldn't figure out the Emperor's game, and honestly didn't think he'd end up tied to this Duchess. He took the title to land his sister a good marriage. Even though Lazlo suddenly became nobility, the sneers for being a commoner and mercenary didn't vanish. He knew exactly how the marriage market would treat him. After watching a bit, Lazlo realized the noble marriage game was seriously gross. But Edel Lancaster was smiling, even when they sold her to some deranged old geezer. No fight, no fuss. Maybe the woman was just after power, selling her youth for a shot at it. But for some reason, Lazlo couldn't tear his eyes off her. Still, they never got to exchange a word. Not that they could, because Edel was born into nobility, and he? Not so much. But now that woman was working as his household maid. The Emperor's move was probably just a warning. If Lazlo hadn't taken her in, this woman would have either been sold or just ended it all. But Edel was left all alone in the estate when everyone bolted. Count Canyon cut ties with his kids to save his own skin. In the end, the Duchess was abandoned by both the duchy and the Count's family. But she just couldn't bring herself to die. Lazlo just didn't get how far aristocrats would go to save their own skin, no matter the cost. If we keep her around, there's gotta be a use for her. The next morning rolled around. The head maid flung the laundry back into the tub and mockingly asked the ex-duchess if that's how everyone scrubbed in her fancy house. Edel stared at her, confused. She promised she'd do better. Madame Bohun snapped at her underling Celie. You training our new maid right? Edel had to be watched like a hawk and trained the right way. She was a Lancaster traitor the Count caught. Had to be plotting something. But Celie wasn't sure things would go smoothly. The head maid asked if she was scared of the ghost of the dead duke who'd come to claim his poor wife. Then she cackled and barked orders at the staff. Now Edel got it. What the housekeeper had meant yesterday. Seems like she's trying to flex her power, stomping the last heroine's noble legacy into the dirt. Madame Bohun had been acting this way since she introduced herself to the staff. She was probably waiting for her to break down. As soon as the head maid left, Celie let out a shaky breath. Edel noticed. Celie thought this woman was totally unhinged to bring up the dead. Edel figured out Celie handled laundry and guessed she felt awkward teaching her. Edel decided to wrap up the laundry before the housekeeper found another excuse to pick at her. First things first, deal with what was right in front of her. Edel could handle the teasing, but the real problem was something else entirely. No telling how much longer her body could take this. At the Canyon estate, a teacup crashed to the floor and shattered. Count Canyon started screaming at his daughter, calling her a good-for-nothing waste of space who was completely useless. William asked his dad what they were supposed to do now that Edel had become that mercenary's prize. But the Count demanded they not mention that useless brat. Before that, he had to beg His Majesty to believe Duke Lancaster was threatening them into helping with the treason. The Duke was holding Edel against her will, and as her father, the Count couldn't say no. The Emperor figured if he kept insisting she was innocent, he wouldn't have a problem with what happened to his daughter. The Count immediately nodded in agreement. Once Edel was married, she didn't belong to their family anymore. Kneeling on his knees, Dustin begged and gave up not just the duchy's secrets, but half his damn fortune, all while humiliation burned in his gut. Demarcus was born into the Imperial Tübingen bloodline. He took the throne after his deadbeat dad. He lured in commoners to bolster his power. So yeah, this backstabber was willing to do whatever it took. In the end, he turned that useless little brat into some dirtbag mercenary's toy. The Emperor ruined the Canyon name to send a message to the rest of the nobles. From the get-go, His Majesty had the big plan to use the mighty Dustin to humiliate his whole damn family. The Count ordered his sons to lay low and stay under the radar, but Dustin was determined to rise again. Edel stepped outside on a sunny day to hang her freshly laundered clothes on the lines. enjoying the gentle breeze. Out of nowhere, someone called out to her. She turned around as familiar voices invited her to join them. It was Celie and Layla, big surprise for the ex-duchess, since she didn't expect anyone here to be nice to her. They were heading the same way, so the girls offered to help out. In the end, they all hung up the laundry together. 10 days ago, the main character stepped into this mansion, and ever since, her life had completely changed. Someone might wonder what she's been up to here. Edel was a laundress, and she worked so hard, she could have boasted about it. Because of that, the hero got used to doing laundry. The only problem? The head maid, who nitpicked without reason and mocked the ex-lady of the house. She was always unhappy with the washing. One day, Celie decided to step in and defend Edel. She declared that for a newbie still getting the hang of this tough gig, that result was definitely commendable. So the laundry supervisor told the housekeeper to stick to her own duties. The head maid opened her mouth to protest, but Celie shut her down fast. Edel just stood there, wide-eyed and a little lost, watching the whole back and forth, speechless. Celie snatched up a grimy rag and tossed it at the housekeeper. "Go ahead, give it a shot." The woman bolted, but muttered she'd be watching. Edel blurted out, "Celie, are you all right?" She said she did it for the good of the team. This housekeeper's been driving everyone nuts with her endless pickiness. But Edel, ever the hero, still said thanks. Celie assured her things would settle down in a couple days. The laundry room had mountains of work, so the supervisor barked at everyone to get back to it. One thought hit Edel like a ton of bricks. Those maids were always getting the rough end of the stick because of her. She couldn't even chat with them or know what they were thinking. So Edel just prayed they weren't too crushed. Maybe the laundresses were just too swamped to think about anyone else. The work was brutal. My hands were raw with calluses. For 10 whole days, Count Lazlo didn't so much as look for Edel, like he'd completely forgotten she even existed in his mansion. Lucky for her, the heroine could just live as a regular maid. She was grateful, hell, even happy, to have escaped that duke's house. Tomorrow meant another day of grinding through chores, so the heroine didn't waste time. Just climbed into bed. She just wanted these quiet nights to last, and hoped tomorrow she'd get to nibble apples again. Out of nowhere, Edel heard footsteps heading straight for her door. It was late, and panic crept in. What if the Count had changed his mind? The footsteps halted right outside her door. Edel froze. Her heart started pounding. "Who's there?" she blurted out, voice trembling. A soft knock at the door. A voice called through the door. "It's Daisy. I live next door. Can I come in? I need to talk." Turns out, Daisy was the youngest maid in the whole mansion. The heroine hesitated, then unlocked the door. Daisy waved off the awkwardness. "It's nothing big. I just need to give you something." It was a salve and cream for aching spots. Edel hesitantly asked why she was giving it to her. The junior maid said she hears her groaning in pain every night after a tough work day. The walls here are paper thin, and she lives right next door. Daisy also heard Lady Boxen mocks Edel. The former mistress clearly isn't used to working yet, so it's brutal when everything aches all the time. So Daisy just wanted to give her a remedy. In the world Edel came from, nothing was done without a reason. Daisy handed the medicine to the main character with a warm smile and squeezed her hands to show support. Who knew such a young girl could be so thoughtful? Turns out this world still has pure, genuine hearts. Edel awkwardly thanked Miss Daisy, and the girl instantly flustered, shouting she just needed to say, "Daisy." The main character then let her be called by her first name too. Daisy shyly asked if she could call her sister. Edel pressed the gifted medicine to her chest, nodded, and a warm, genuine smile bloomed on her face. The junior maid offered to help with her back and shoulders, and the heroine hesitantly agreed. If Edel had a diary, she'd write about her new friend today. The next morning, as Celie said, Edel's breakfast was meager, and it didn't surprise the laundry woman at all. The soup portion was cut in half, but there was a roll, though they did give out fruit. Thanks to Daisy's all-natural cream promising pain relief, the body discomfort eased a bit. Edel was often made to starve for her figure before, so this wasn't even bad yet. At that exact moment, the Count was intently reading a new letter. With each new word, his expression grew more serious, as if he were diving into the depths of his thoughts. He ordered her to be brought to the guest room immediately. The heroine followed the butler. Edel was stunned by the sudden call, but reminded herself there'd be people there, so nothing bad would happen to her. The door slowly creaked open. The girl had only hoped the day would be good that morning. The heroine, terribly anxious inside, entered the huge living room and immediately announced her arrival to the Count. She asked why she was summoned. The Count pointed to the seat opposite him and asked her to sit down. Every time the heroine found herself in Count Lazlo's presence, she felt a crushing sense of oppression. Edel didn't resist and immediately did as he asked. Lazlo asked if she knew Widow Marchioness Barbara Celestine. The unexpected question jolted the heroine. She'd actually been friends with the Marchioness, but Edel didn't understand why he suddenly brought it up. Lazlo narrowed his eyes and asked again if they knew each other. The heroine decided it was best not to mention their friendship, so she told the Count they'd only had tea together a couple of times. The man suggested the tea must have been delicious for a proper lady to send a desperate letter to a mad mercenary. The heroine asked emotionally and loudly if it was really the Marchioness's letter. Only then did she realize she should have kept her emotions in check. The Count's gaze turned piercing. He handed the letter to the former Duchess, and Edel, trembling with emotion, took it. In it, Barbara pleaded with the Count not to push Miss Edel into deeper despair. She'd known nothing about her husband's plans. Once the heroine stopped being a duchess, a lot of people turned their backs on her. But that's natural, since the charges were serious. Marchioness Barbara, though, genuinely believed in her innocence, and she was also really worried about her, which the main character didn't expect at all. Surprisingly, Edel found kindness in this place. Now she was getting comfort from an old friend. The main character felt real, honest comfort from a close friend, and could barely hold back her emotions. But it wasn't clear what Count Croesus was thinking. He might assume Barbara's backing the Duke and the anti-imperial faction. Edel calmly explained to the Count there was no connection between their families. This friendship was purely personal, so she asked him not to misinterpret this letter. Lazlo figured everyone already saw him as some kind of monster. The heroine realized in horror her careless words just hurt the Count, and nervously asked for forgiveness. Lazlo looked at her intently. The Count pointed out she was shaking like he was about to chop someone's head off right now. Realizing what he'd just said, the man knew he shouldn't have brought that up in front of her. The main character couldn't hide her shock. Her eyes went wide as she stared at him. She'd never seen the Count look like that before. Edel couldn't believe he actually looked guilty. Lazlo knew, in her eyes, he was just the guy who'd captured and beheaded the Lancaster Duke's first daughter. Maybe she saw him as a ruthless monster. The Count had no idea how he'd slipped up like that. He'd just been curious why Marchioness Celestine needed it. But he'd come off as way too forward instead. Lazlo had no clue what she was thinking right now. The main character reread the letter one more time. Then she calmly said, "The Count doesn't need to worry. He just did his job, following the king's orders and winning the victory." But Lazlo didn't get how she could say stuff like that so calmly. There wasn't a trace of hatred in the former Duchess. Instead, her eyes still burned with bright hope and faith in a better future. No matter the hardships life threw at her, Miss Edel really was worthy of being a duchess. Unlike her, Lazlo had only ever earned the title of Count. This beautiful, well-educated woman had nothing in common with him. Someone who hadn't changed a bit since then. Lazlo realized he felt ashamed right then. He told the young woman to write her own reply. His excuses wouldn't matter anyway. The heroine's face lit up with a happy smile. Lazlo froze for a few seconds. Then he added, "Make sure to write that I won't treat you the way society expects." Edel stared at him, confused. She didn't know what to say, so she just thanked him. Lazlo was furious about the rumors. How could people think he'd be that low, with a little sister? It was brutal for someone who'd never even held a woman's hand, especially since Edel was so fragile, like a wounded bird. She tried to look tough, but she wasn't. That woman would panic at a common mercenary's touch, so Lazlo vowed he'd never hurt her. Edel pressed the letter to her chest and sincerely thanked him again. She didn't even notice how shaken the Count was. Edel said they'd done a solid job today as they walked back to the room with Daisy, who was shaking from the cold water. "Looks like this mansion's never had hot water." The girls said their goodbyes at the door. The heroine spotted a pen and paper on her desk the second she walked in. Surprised even. So those words, they were genuine. When Edel asked for paper and a pen, the Count told her to feel free to ask for stuff like that. The heroine sprinted to the desk, beaming, already brainstorming where to start. But the letter'd probably be checked, so she couldn't write freely like before. Edel placed a candle beside her, then grabbed the pen. She still remembered how they'd met 7 years ago. It was at Countess Radrick's tea party, when all the ladies were shocked by the arrival of Dowager Marchioness Celestine. Edel got curious and asked, "What's the deal with the Marchioness?" Turns out, the Countess and Marchioness were total enemies. The heroine blurted, "Wait, why'd they even invite her?" But no one had time to answer. The announcer called out, "The Dowager Marchioness Celestine has arrived." Then Edel laid eyes on her for the first time. The woman paused for a moment, sizing up the situation, then scanned everyone around with a piercing gaze. Up until then, Edel hadn't heard the click of heels. The Marchioness limped on one leg, probably had a prosthetic, no doubt about it. Edel was horrified. This hall amplified footsteps way more than other rooms, which was exactly why they'd invited the Marchioness. You couldn't just exploit someone's weaknesses like that, not even if you didn't know your place in their life. Edel sprinted over to the Marchioness. She spun up a quick story. How this woman once helped her fix a broken carriage wheel in the city. The Marchioness declined the thanks and just walked off. Barbara gave the young lady a wide-eyed stare. One of the ladies remarked how noble and admirable it was of the Marchioness to be so kind. Edel prayed this whole act looked convincing. She needed her over-the-top excitement to drown out the awkward clatter and sudden quiet. The Marchioness took her hands, warm smile on her face, teasing tone in her voice, called her persistent with a playful edge. Back then, Edel had been proud as punch for helping an elderly woman in need. Pretty soon, the ladies got to gossiping about Viscountess Oberon, finally calling it quits on her marriage. The main rumor was about her side hustle, but some gals figured she might have been seeing another guy instead. In high society, it's way easier to cut someone down than Edel ever realized. Suddenly, Marchioness Celestine slammed her teacup down with a crash. Barbara, arms crossed and voice sharp, muttered how the gossip had gone straight to hell compared to her day. She asked why it's such a crime to want to prove yourself and get your due. To her, there was nothing wrong with being hungry for success. Edel couldn't wrap her head around how you could live like that and not be totally messed up. Countess Regressed shot back that it wasn't even close to how men run their business outside the house. But the Marchioness snapped that Lady Oberon was just a woman who took over the mess her husband couldn't handle. We should all be fighting for what's ours, not stabbing each other in the back. Radrak's sly squad snickered, hinting the Marchioness saw a mirror in Lady Oberon. Half the room agreed with the hostess. Only Edel stood with the Marchioness. After that chaotic tea party, the main character caught up to the Marchioness. She asked if she could take up a bit of her time. Edel admitted she messed up by pitying her back then, since she didn't know the Marchesa was stronger than everyone else there. She wanted to be just like her, so she asked to visit occasionally. Barbara really liked hearing that, because she wanted to keep talking to her too. That way, they quietly became the closest friends. Maybe the Marchesa cared about her more than anyone else on the planet. If the main character had actually listened to her back then, a lot of things might be different now. Barbara was yelling that Edel needed to break free from those manipulative guys trying to control her. But if the main character refused her dad's orders, she'd be dead. The Marchesa said all she had to do was ask for help, and she'd handle the rest. That was their final meeting. Edel's heart felt so heavy with grief and sorrow. It was like a ton of memories was crushing it. She whispered an apology to Barbara. Madame Buxon asked if it was true that Edel had called that girl to see the Count. Mina nodded and said it was during the day in the parlor. But the ex-duchess left so fast, it wasn't anything serious. The housekeeper figured there was a reason behind it. Even Celia was sticking up for her. The head maid decided it was time to keep Edel, Celia, Layla, and Daisy in check. These little brats needed to learn their place. Mina remembered hearing the servants grumble about having to clean up in icy water. Rumors even started floating around, but she kept denying them. Hot water was her and Lady Boyun's special perk. Still, all the cash got replaced fast by selling the Count's stuff, but the housekeeper told them to keep their traps shut. If the lady found out, it'd be a disaster. But Mina was certain she didn't give a damn. Boyun smirked. It was the truth after all. Lady Line only trusted her, and the Count was never around. The old maid was already running this house, just needed to wait a little longer. Edel slipped the letter to the butler. Celia was losing her mind. How long would this endless laundry last? They were forced to do pointless chores. The housekeeper was up to something again, probably whispering in Lady Line's ear like usual. The laundry manager was right. Madame Bohyan pitched an idea, and the lady okayed it. Had to keep the mansion running like clockwork. After that deep clean, Daisy's body was one big bruise. There was a ton of work since the housekeeper was always stirring up trouble. Daisy realized she'd been here a month and hadn't laid eyes on a single guest. Guess it was due to those not-so-great rumors about the Count. Edel thought the same thing at first, but judging by his kindness and usual behavior, the guy didn't seem like a bad dude, like some might think. Daisy figured even without guests, they had plenty of work because of Madame Linnea. The junior maid said she's talking to the Count's sister now. When the lady was in a bad mood, it got brutal. She'd butt into every servant's business. They say the Count started raking it in from a young age. Thanks to that, he and his brother never went hungry. Daisy didn't get why young Madame Linnea was so clueless. Her own brother worked his tail off to get that noble title. Edel caught herself thinking it's like she swapped lives with the Count and the lady. At least she finally learned how to do laundry in this mansion, something she had no clue about before. This was their first taste of high society living. The main heroine guessed they probably just didn't know how to act like real nobles. Looks like the Count never really cared about the estate's business. All the real power was in the steward's hands. A bunch of the maids quit because of her, but they always took it out on the young lady since the Count gave great recommendations. He looked intimidating, but he was a decent guy. Edel realized the Croesus family had a mess on their hands. As long as Emperor Demarcus Tuberin's grip on power stays strong, Count Lazlo Croesus needs to keep up his end. So the Count needs to find a solid right-hand man ASAP. Like, maybe he could get married, no matter who ends up as Count Croesus's wife. The main heroine just hoped she'd cut her some slack. The next day, Lady Linnea had Edel brought to her. The girl was dying to see what the ex-duchess looked like, but Linnea didn't look much like her older brother at all. The main heroine calmly said she's just Edel now. The Lancaster family's gone, but Lean snapped back, already annoyed. Yeah, I get it. Edel thought about how old this lady was, and guessed she was around 20. Then she blurted out, "How'd you end up marrying that 60-year-old Duke Lancaster?" Unfortunately, Edel couldn't pick who she married. The lady started ranting, and the heroine's face lit up with a soft smile. Line didn't even try to be polite. "How'd you sleep with a guy that old?" she shot back. Turns out, the Duke had a mistress. Edel never even slept with him. Line froze when she heard the mistress was running the Duke's cash for the rebellion, and was probably dead now. The Count's sister was clueless about what Edel's deal was in that house. Back then, our heroine was desperate to prove her worth. If she handled things right and did her job well, she'd absolutely be better. But Edel was just filling space, keeping the family image shiny. The heroine mentally called her past self a total idiot and smiled. But young Line didn't catch the hint. The blonde one looked down on her too. To Line, Edel was basically a slave now, and couldn't act like a respected Count's daughter anymore. But the protagonist didn't get why she suddenly snapped. Line was furious that the maid had the audacity to look down on her. She ordered Edel to drop to her knees right then. Line couldn't fathom how a common servant dared to look down on her mistress. Edel apologized instantly and dropped to her knees. She stood there because no one told her to sit. But the Count's sister hadn't expected such submission from a former duchess, so she asked if she had no pride left. Edel reminded her she was no longer a duchess. How priceless noble pride really was. Now Lady Line was the protagonist's mistress, so her knees weren't worth much in this situation. Edel wondered what true pride and honor really were. But Line suddenly demanded how a common servant dared to defy her. The young mistress's voice cracked into a scream. She knew all too well that nobles only wanted to mock others. Edel realized she was projecting all the nobles onto her right now. The Countess's sister barked at the woman to get out of her room, now. This girl stood right in the middle of that chaos the main character had luckily left behind. Lynn could have stayed innocent and sweet. For some reason, this girl reminded Edel of someone. She remembered her little sister, how the kid cried, certain she couldn't take it anymore. Edel tried to calm her down, but her sister shoved her hand away. The main character wasn't expecting that one bit. In Lynn's eyes, the older sister could handle it, because she was a totally different person. Lynn had already had enough. Now her life meant nothing. Edel's little sister wasn't around anymore. Lynn Canyon walked out, leaving the main character all alone. The Canyon family story is not exactly legendary. It starts with their great-grandpa, who won some land and found sapphires on it. He struck it rich real fast and handed the palace a fat stack of cash. The cash-strapped imperial court, grateful as hell, gave him the Count title. They were rich folks with no honor or pride. One day, Dustin Canyon made his youngest daughter list the 4 main families, but the 10-year-old kid messed up. Next up was Edel, the 12-year-old, who got every detail right. Those 4 families were so powerful, not even the imperial court could ignore them. The Count coldly ordered, "Never forget this." It was necessary, so no one looked down on their family. Dustin Canyon shouted, "We have to marry into one of those families." Walking into the corridor, Lynn asked her sister, "Will I ever be as good as you?" The kid thought she was too stupid. Edel snapped, "That's not true at all." But Lynn remembered her father's words from earlier. The blonde said, "Dad's just strict. He wants the best for us." Edel took her younger sister's hand. She suggested, "Let's not talk about this now. Grab some cookies and study later." Lynn smiled and agreed with her sister. She loved doing everything with Edel, but the butler told her to go back to her room. Starting today, Lady Lynn was banned from sweets. It was all Lord Canyon's order. The main character didn't get it, but the butler just coldly asked Lady Lynn if she'd finished her homework yet. The girl hesitated, then answered, "No." Lauren took off immediately, telling her older sister, "You go ahead and eat the sweets. I'll do my homework instead." Their dad had always been strict, but now he was straight up brutal. For some reason, he only laid into the daughters like this. But little Edel couldn't do a thing to change it. It gnawed at her, leaving her both heavy-hearted and seething. She just wanted to grow up faster, fast enough to help Lynn. But it wasn't clear if getting married would actually fix everything. Maybe she could become the perfect lady. And if she kept pushing, even a graceful bride. Edel had to be the Empire's best bride. All she had to do was look delicate and flash that perfect smile. If she could do that, maybe Edel could give her dad the power he'd been dreaming of since the day he was born. Even at 16, Lynn's dad was still yelling at her, saying her brains would keep her from ever getting married. Her sister, meanwhile, had already launched her high society debut, flashing her face everywhere. The Count wanted Lynn to finally be useful. The main character wondered if her sister would even like her present. The white bird stretched its wings slowly and gracefully, ready to take flight, like an angel about to soar into the sky. Lynn, tears streaming down her face, told her sister she couldn't take it anymore. She just wanted to fly away like a bird. And she did. The Count coldly told Edel that Lynn was dead. Edel froze on the spot. Her heart stopped at the shock. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Edel asked again, and the Count snapped back, "Have you turned as thick-headed as her?" Turns out Lynn fell from the 3rd-floor balcony while looking outside. That's why Dustin Canyon ordered silence. The family left, leaving Edel alone. The Count was furious. Another problem had just crashed into their lives. Edel's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, begging Lynn over and over, "Why did you do this?" Edel remembered every time Lynn said how hard it was. Lynn was always crying, not sure how much more she could take. The heroine, who had started feeling hopeful again after meeting Barbara, sank back into despair, and eventually got married. Actually, Edel was thinking the same thing as Lynn, but the heroine still had her, so she kept putting up with it. Like, how can things ever be okay for someone forced to live a life they don't want, while their real dreams get crushed? Edel could help Lady Lynn, but she wasn't sure if she had the right to interfere. She shut her eyes tight. Her heart felt like lead. But what really burned the heroine was her own helplessness. By dusk, Count Crixa returned to the estate. He noticed even the housekeeper didn't come to greet him. Even weird, since this estate was just for meeting mercenaries. Lady Lynn perked up when she saw her brother back. She heard today was rough on Lazlo. Young mistress asked what he'd been up to at the palace, and the Count shot back, "Why are you asking?" Lady Lynn shrugged. "No big reason," she said. Lazlo didn't get why his sister was trailing him into the room. The guy figured she was about to say something, but Linnea said there was nothing to it. The girl told him she was invited to a tea party. It was hosted by Viscountess Emerson. Lazlo told his sister if she didn't want to go, she didn't have to. But Linnea saw it as the perfect chance to wear a dress. She was just a bit confused, didn't know what the hell they'd talk about. So Linnea begged her brother to find her a good governess. Lazlo asked his sister if she'd promised to actually study and stop throwing tantrums. But the girl shot back. When had she ever been a brat? But the Count demanded straight answers. He'd hired her governesses before, but none lasted 2 weeks in this house. But that's not how it went. Those women started laughing at her first, acted all proper, but called her a walking disaster behind her back. She put up with it at parties, but in the house, she'd scream all she wanted. The problem wasn't her, it was those spoiled teachers. But the young lady suddenly remembered how the former Duchess had acted differently toward her. The Count's eyes widened the moment he realized it was Edel they were talking about. Despite her higher status, there was no pride in this woman when she was ordered to kneel. Linnea had just invited her to have fun, but she was so damn noble. Lazlo started screaming at his sister, asking if she even understood how disgraceful her actions were. After all, they had always hated people who used power to humiliate others. Linnea knew that perfectly well, but she didn't get it. Didn't she have the right to act the same way? The aristocrats had always looked down on her, so the girl wanted to do the same, not seeing anything wrong with it. But the Count explained she hadn't humiliated an aristocrat. She'd mocked a servant. That's what you call cowardice. Linnea thought her brother just didn't get it. She hadn't even told him about the insults she put up with to avoid making him upset, even though it nearly killed her. So she called him way too righteous, her voice full of bitterness. Linnea stormed out, finally snapping that she never wanted to see him again. The door slammed shut, and Lazlo was left torn between confusion and mixed emotions after that conversation with his sister. He didn't even know what to do. He had no idea what he was doing, all because of the title that Snake shoved down his throat. The Emperor declared Lazlo had to be a role model for all the other mercenaries, and it took him a while to grasp what that meant. But mercenaries needed hope for a brighter future. Power was needed not just to protect the Calliope unit, but everything that mattered. That's why the Emperor had his reasons for giving Lazlo such a high title. He hoped the mercenary would one day accept his fate. But at that moment, the hero didn't even know what to do with his sister. He was thinking about searching the guards again for a governess, but he needed to warn Linnea this was the last time. Still, the Count decided to buy her that expensive dress and necklace anyway. He also wanted to check in on Edel. He wondered if she was crying alone right now. Lazlo started thinking about going to apologize for his little sister and her lousy treatment of Edel, but quickly changed his mind. Realizing he was overthinking this woman, Lazlo immediately flung the terrace doors open. His face flushed a little, but the young man's thoughts cleared up. Visiting now would stir up bad rumors. The man with purple eyes took a long drag. After the victory banquet, things got tense. Everyone was on edge, because the Duke of Lancaster's family fell so easy. They looked tougher than the imperial family themselves. But it all came crashing down because of that dirty beast, Lazlo Crisis. Who'd have thought the imperial family would swallow their pride and actually reach out to that dirty mercenary? Demarcus Tuberin showed up from the battlefield too. The men pushed to replace the emperor. If Demarcus stays on that throne, they're all doomed. But not yet, not time yet. If those three big families make a move, they'll get caught and charged with treason. Marquis Thelaine asked about that family that suddenly struck it rich. It was the Canyon County. Duke Barrington remembered. Count's daughter got handed over to that smug mercenary, Chrysos. Marquis Wimbler smirked. That Count's the type. He sold his own daughter for favors. That little string might lead us somewhere. The father's demanding voice closed in on Edel from every direction. She shot her eyes open, realizing it was just a nightmare. Sometimes the main character still found herself thinking about it, and her real family members. The question was, did their huge fortune really bring them joy? If they wanted to act like noble gentry, they should have donated to orphanages or hospitals for the poor. But now all of that felt pointless. A sunny morning made for a pleasant start to another day. Over breakfast, the main character overheard one of the maids getting scolded. The woman ranted about how the girl needed to do her job on time and stop holding her up. But Edel knew these two worked in separate places. Still, the heroine told herself it wasn't her concern. Noticing Edel had finished eating, the laundry supervisor offered to take her, and she agreed. The mansion was quieter than usual. Lady Linnea had taken the head maid with her. Without the housekeeper around, nobody felt like hurrying. Celie offered to check it out herself. Edel had been here 2 months, so it made sense she checked the mansion. So she'd go fetch the laundry herself today. The women took over what Edel left unfinished yesterday. The main character was hesitant, but they reassured her. They remembered how rough Edel had it talking to the young mistress yesterday, so they gave her a little break. In the end, the main character agreed and promised to come back soon. Layla told Celia how kind she was. Edel would have been swamped with all that dirty laundry alone, so the laundry head decided to give her a break. But the heroine really needed to get the lay of the mansion. Other maids could bail any minute, but Edel's stuck here. She's a war prize. The heroine stepped out of the laundry room for the first time during peak chaos. Cleaning was in full swing inside the mansion. Edel knew Layla and Celia gave her a break on purpose, so she pushed to wrap up fast and help them out. Now she felt like she'd actually earned some respect. Out of nowhere, Edel spotted a maid she'd seen before. The main character didn't get why she wasn't on duty, chilling while everyone else worked their butts off. She wondered where the hell the maids who were supposed to be here were. Edel knew a whole crew had the head maid in their sights, but she couldn't let someone else handle it. She started to wonder if the Count had a clue about this. Guess Edel didn't have a choice but to sit back and watch all the drama in this manner. Out of nowhere, Edel caught some guys' voices coming from the next room. Crix's voice for sure, and another dude with him. She was out of there before those guys could spot her, but the mercenary still caught her. He yanked the door open, and Edel froze in her tracks. He'd told the cook to keep everyone out, yet here was some snoop trying to listen in. The mercenary started barking at her to state her business. Crixus recognized the ex-duchess instantly and stammered, "What are you doing here?" Edel stayed cool and said, "Just a laundry maid from the basement." She bowed and said she was picking up his linens, then added she'd come back another time. But Lazlo waved her off. "Nah, just go ahead." The blonde looked completely thrown by his captain's call. He didn't recognize the face until later, and when he realized it was the Duchess from the Lancaster family, he was completely shocked. But the guy skeptically asked if she could even do laundry. Lord Chrysis coldly asked his subordinate if he'd even seen the woman's hands. Those were the hands of someone who works hard. No sense judging by prejudice. And besides, Edel had never received secret messages from her father, Lord Canyon. The blonde was surprised the captain used her name. Lazlo froze, realizing it. He suggested getting back to their conversation. There was a red rat to track and a yellow fox to watch for. Then the Count announced he needed to head to the palace now. No suspicions, but the situation felt complicated. Edel wasn't in a position to say anything, so she decided to do whatever she could. The captain approached Lord Milton and asked if he'd finished training. Commander Edmund Milton of the Imperial Knights was hitting the guard standards right now. Even though the Lancaster rebellion's been crushed, no one knows what forces might rise again. Edmund believed in always being ready. One of the knights let it be known that without Count Chrysis, the deputy commander would already be a guard captain. But Edmund believed each had their place. Society valued the guard that served the king directly above all else, but the two branches still worked together. The commander told him to ease up, but Edmund insisted he was just doing his job. Every move the Emperor made carried weight, so it wasn't a stretch to think his appointment as a commoner and ex-mercenary was no accident. But the order's reaction? Edmund wasn't buying it. Lazlo grabbed his clothes, eager to hide the scars on his back. He picked a black shirt and buttoned every button neatly, standing by his desk. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside the door. Lazlo snapped, "Who's there?" The voices beyond the door claimed to be order knights here to see the guard captain. Terrace Bogarden, Angelo Valen, and Joseph Oz introduced themselves the second the Count let them in. Lazlo crossed his arms. "What do you want?" Felt like a random demand out of nowhere. The Count ordered us to stick to the point, so the three knights nervously asked for the honor of training under his guidance. That was a sudden request. The Count asked why they'd come here to make such a demand. The knights were actually surprised by the commander's question. They just wanted to get stronger, but palace training was the same for all, so it was easy to slack off. They wanted to train under someone strong, who could assess their skills without bias. That's why they thought of Count Chrysis. Lazlo was the youngest captain in the Imperial Guard, and his training methods were legendary. They were also curious how the Imperial Guard trained. One of them had mentioned that the captain always kept his door open for ambitious knights. That wasn't entirely true. Lazlo never turned anyone away. It's just that none of these elites ever asked the mercenary captain for help. But these knights were falling apart from bad posture. Lazlo didn't think they'd get far. He wasn't against those who wanted to get better. The Count never thought he'd hear something like that from knights. Lazlo praised their eagerness to train and said he'd ask just one question right now. The Count wanted to know why they wanted to do this at his house. Training at the palace was a pain because of all the supervisors. The knights thought it'd feel weird training under the captain of the guards when their own commander was around. There was some rivalry between the royal guard and the knights, so adding extra tension was a bad idea. Lazlo told the knights they could come next Saturday at 3 p.m. Their faces lit up with happy smiles instantly. Teaching the basics wasn't the biggest problem, but Count Croesus wasn't sure how much they could improve their physical skills. But genuine determination to get stronger was priceless. The housekeeper announced guests were coming over the weekend, so everyone needed to clean their area thoroughly. But the maids weren't thrilled about it. Madame Bocchion added the laundry room needed to take down winter curtains and get fresh spring ones ready. But the mansion had over 150 curtains. In winter, they took forever to dry, but the housekeeper claimed it wasn't her problem. The laundry room was stuck with the washing, and now it was unclear if their staff could host guests properly. Edel couldn't figure out what suddenly got into Count Croesus. A few days later, Lazlo decided not to head to the palace. In the end, the Count ordered a trip to Granny Street, a high-end district where the grand noble mansion stood. The Marquis of Celestine's butler greeted Lord Croesus. Marquis Celestine, in his fancy outfit, rushed out to meet the Count and said they'd finally managed to meet. Lazlo thanked him for the invite. The Marquis's mother stepped over soon after. Barbara, with a warm smile, said to skip the long titles and just call her by name. Lazlo bowed and gave his own name, but the Marchioness knew he was the family head, so she stuck with calling him Count. Lazlo thought it best to avoid awkward titles that might make things stiff. Barbara agreed. As expected from a family head, Lazlo was a tough guy. In the end, our heroes found themselves at the table. Count Croesus wondered if hosting guests like this was even possible in his house with that butler and all the attention, but he quickly realized absolutely not. Marquise sipped her tea and spoke up to the Count. First up, the woman, face slightly worried, voice genuinely curious, asked how Edel was doing. How could a noblewoman work as a maid so easily? That was exactly why Lazlo accepted the invitation. A month had passed since Edel's reply, so Count Croesus had a pretty good idea what this meeting was really about. The Marquise decided to lay it all out for the Count. Even though he'd been keeping tabs on the Emperor, his mom Barbara wanted to meet Count Croesus face to face. Lazlo had to know the reason. There are 3 factions in high society: the Imperial Party pushing to tighten the Emperor's grip, and the old aristocracy clinging to their power. Then there was the neutral faction, staying out of it entirely. The Marquis shifted his stance, not just because of Miss Edel, but also out of a desire to get to know the Emperor and Count Croesus better. Lazlo wasn't sure if he should even thank her for trying to have a conversation. Barbara said she'd read Edel's letter that the Count sent over. Edel didn't want to bother anyone, but working in the laundry had to be brutal for her. So the House of Celestine couldn't leave innocent Edel in that situation. But until the rumors die down, she'll stay a servant. The Marchioness wanted to know what came next, and Lazlo honestly said he was still thinking it over. So he asked Barbara what she was willing to do for Edel. Confusion flickered across the woman's face. Meanwhile, Count Croesus stayed dead serious, waiting for the answer from his ex-duchess's friend working under his roof. Barbara was ready to do whatever it took. Lazlo grinned and said they'd get along just fine. Sure, love knows no age, but Barbara teased the Count to find a lady his own age. The Count caught himself thinking Edel could definitely live here, happy and content. Lazlo was sure that's exactly how it'd go. The next day at the Croesus estate, young Lady Linya stared at the man in terror. He told her the Count had been urgently called away by the Emperor, so she'd have to host the guests and give them a tour. Linya couldn't wrap her head around how this was even possible. Knights were coming to the house today, but her brother wouldn't be here, and this was her first time hosting a tea party. At a critical moment, Lazlo was gone, and she had no clue what to do. Linya tried to copy what she'd seen before, but wasn't sure if she was doing it right. She feared she'd be laughed at again, but the head maid chuckled and told the young lady not to panic. Everything would go perfectly. If only someone she could trust were here. She suddenly barked for Edel Lancaster to be brought to her right away. That woman obviously knew tea parties inside out. Edel burst into the young lady's room, and Linya nervously urged her to hurry in. The housekeeper suggested the lady let Edel handle the service and take charge of everything. Show the guests how a former duchess tends to her. Pretty impressive stuff, if you ask me. Even with the housekeeper in the room, Linnea called for Edel. But now Bohyun could watch the duchess squirm. Linnea knew laundry work wasn't exactly a cakewalk, so today Edel would stick close to help. 3 Imperial Guard Knights were coming soon, and the brother was running late, so they'd have to greet them when they rolled in. Linnea wasn't sure if she should meet the guests at the front door. That's usually the butler's job, but since he wasn't around, the head maid had to step in and show the guests to the parlor. Lady Bohyun grudgingly admitted Edel knew her stuff. Linnea asked if she should hang out in the parlor. The knights don't have titles, and since Lady's filling in as head of the household, it's fitting she make an appearance after they arrive. The Countess's sister gave the go-ahead for Edel to serve the refreshments at the right moment when the guests show up. Linnea perked up when the ex-duchess announced she was heading straight to the kitchen. That meant Edel would handle everything with her usual flair. The main character stormed into the hallway and clutched her head. 1 second she was fine. The next she was feeling queasy, but she had to tough it out until they could send the guests back. Linnea checked the clock and realized the time was almost up. She had to handle it, being the sister of the head of the house. Edel walked into the room and told her mistress the guests had arrived, so she decided to go greet them. But the maid had a suggestion before that. Edel asked for a handkerchief and powder. Linnea grabbed them fast and handed them to the blonde, so she could get to work right away. The Count's sister didn't get what she was doing. She'd already done her makeup in the morning, and in the mirror, everything looked good. Imasha had really gone all out for the guests, but the ex-duchess still wanted to make some adjustments. Once everything was set, Linnea stared at the mirror in surprise. She looked way more modest now, so she told Edel to add more floral powder. But that kind of powder was inappropriate for a young unmarried lady. Young girls were expected to show their natural skin tone. The main character tried to explain that using makeup to fake blush would cause talk. People would think the young lady was trying to seduce men. Linnea froze when she heard that. Now she got why everyone had been giving her weird looks. She'd been slathering on this floral powder every day. Imasha said it's all the rage among the upper class. But Edel grabbed her shoulders and tried to calm her down, saying everything was fine. Just stop doing that. And the Count's younger sister started seeing the former Duchess of Lancaster in a whole new light. Time to welcome the guests. Linnea had to step up as head of the household. The young lady's face showed a flicker of fear, but she wasn't about to back down. She offered to go with Edel. They stopped in front of the huge door. Edel told her not to worry. Aristocrats always followed those higher in rank. Right now, Linnea was the highest-ranking person here. The girl didn't get why Edel was saying that. She treated her like crap last time. The blonde was just a servant, like Imasha, who was always on hand. Edel told the lady to look down her nose at the knights, making clear she was in charge here. Those words from the woman calmed Linnea down. Now she was ready to welcome the guest. That same morning, in the Emperor's study, Demarcus Tuberin was wondering why so many rebels were crawling to him now, begging for leniency. He ordered Count Talon to handle it. All these people begged for mercy, bringing up the late emperor. No ruler had ever gotten as much love and support from the nobles as Demarcus's dad. People clearly missed those days. But that emperor was an incompetent ruler. He turned a blind eye to noble corruption and only cared about his own pleasures. After his death, Demarcus swore he wouldn't be like his father and would drag this country out of its rotting swamp. He was determined to restore justice to the land. Rebels shouldn't get a pardon just because they were nobles. The empire has its laws, and many even welcomed harsher punishments. Demarcus was definitely on board. There were few capable people. Even Count Lazlo, who visited Marquis Celestine's estate, didn't report this to the emperor. Few knew just how deep the connection between Barbara and Edel was. The emperor asked how the meeting with Lazlo went. According to our source, the invite came straight from the Marchioness. The Count might have been trying to gauge the neutral factions vibe. It's been 2 months since Edel became a maid. Not enough to fall head over heels, but just enough to stir something. The emperor wanted to know how the lord would report back, and if he'd mention Edel's sorry state. Lady Linnea Lazlo strode into the parlor with confidence. She flashed a sly grin at the knights. "How long have you been waiting for me?" Then she introduced herself and thanked the men for making the trip to her estate. The knights immediately started gushing over Lady Linnea's beauty. She explained her brother was delayed by an unexpected imperial summons. The young lady quickly offered the knights seats. They all thanked her at once, still flustered in the presence of nobility. Words just poured out of Linnea's mouth. The door creaked open, and Edel stepped in. The young lady explained she'd specially prepared tea and snacks, really hoping the gentleman would like them. Linnea was thrilled about hosting her first tea party at the manor. She watched in surprise as Edel poured the tea. The girl just couldn't believe this was all the food. Linnea had framed things a bit differently, so she was second-guessing how the guests would react. But everyone's eyes were on Edel. She finished her job and headed for the door. Out of the blue, one of the knights suddenly said he needed to wash up before the meal. Code for wanting to bail. Linnea was about to call a servant, but he shot her down. The knight figured it wasn't worth dragging someone in from the other side of the castle, when he could just ask that maid. Another knight jumped in to go with his buddy. Linnea was starting to wonder if it was seriously rude to ditch the host like this. She really hoped those knights weren't making a joke at her expense. And in her head, she begged Edel to hurry back. She told the guys to follow her. Angelo Valen and Joseph Oz caught up with her in 2 seconds. They never expected to get this close to the gorgeous ex-Duchess of Lancaster. Now Edel finally got why they wanted a guided tour. She pushed the knight off her. The main heroine pointed to the men's restroom and added that she'd take them back to Lady Line in the living room after. The knights were taken aback by the maid's noble behavior. They told her to escort them all the way to the front door. Joseph touched the girl's face and said, "A lowly maid doesn't get to ignore an imperial knight's command." But no one had the right to treat Edel that way. She explained that the Imperial Night Guard was the most respected order in the Peaceborough Empire. Now, after visiting the captain's mansion, the knights had started harassing the maid. They were acting like total scum. Edel demanded the knights give their names. She needed to know which families these men came from. Clearly, their upbringing was lacking. Harassing a maid in the captain's home was a slap in the face to his authority. Edel hoped that would be enough to make them back off. Angelo Valen and Josiah Oz were seething that a common maid was talking back to them. But Edel wasn't the type to stay silent about this. That blonde maid was exactly the one they couldn't fire, so she'd report everything to the Count, no doubt about it. Edel told them to stop immediately, or they'd be fired. Meanwhile, the living room was tense as hell, and Linnea was really hoping Edel would come back soon. Joseph yanked the maid's arm and snapped, "How dare you talk to me like that?" He gave her a chance, but apparently words weren't cutting it. Edel tried to pull away, but Joseph ordered Angelo not just to follow her, but finally shut her up. The heroine glanced at him, wide-eyed, as he barked, "Sit still!" Time stopped when the knight raised his sword, but right next to him, a dagger zipped past and embedded in the wall, trailing a whisper of cold air. The knights froze instantly. Count Chrysis was heading their way. Lazlo gritted his teeth and asked, "Is this why you were so hell-bent on training at my estate?" Joseph let go of the maid instantly. The heroine got to her feet and greeted the Count. Lazlo's eyes burned with fury. The knights quickly started defending themselves, saying the woman was the one who hit on them and begged to be taken away. The Count asked Edel if it was really true. The knights swore they weren't lying, so the captain of the guards decided to behead them. They had to be punished for their lies. Lazlo had been hearing those dirty conversations from the start, echoing down his mansion's huge corridor. He unsheathed his sword and gave the knights a cold stare. They dropped to their knees, begging for mercy. They'd never seen such a beautiful woman and just lost their heads. Count asked Edel, "What do you want to do with them?" The main heroine didn't think he'd ask her what to do, so she said they should go by the military law. But Lazlo didn't remember all the specifics. Edel explained they'd face expulsion from the order, plus flogging and having to pay compensation. There was a case where the captain of the Imperial Order lopped off a knight's right hand. Out of nowhere, a knight shouted, "Lord Edmund Milton will explain everything!" Even though they tried to hide behind the deputy commander, Lazlo decided to let them live. In the end, the men were tied up. Count Chrysis finally turned to the laundress and asked why she was in that part of the mansion. The heroine mumbled something back. Lazlo's eyes widened when he saw how the woman was doing. The Count froze for a second, the moment Edel's legs gave out, and she collapsed right in front of him. He sprinted to her side, shouting her name. News of the incident at the Crixus estate spread like wildfire through all the staff. Now the head maid stood in the hallway, while Count Crixus scolded her in front of every other servant. Lazlo couldn't wrap his head around how she managed the estate at all. The Count asked Imasha if he'd mentioned the woman's status, and the housekeeper said he'd called her a prisoner himself. He replied coldly that Edel was a gift from the Emperor. The housekeeper tried to explain that all orders came from Lady Linnea, but the head maid's main job was to watch Count Crixus's younger sister's every move. If Edel didn't recover, Lazlo promised the housekeeper, the Imperial Order would take her away. Everyone involved had to keep their mouths shut. Imasha had zero clue what made this Edel Lancaster so special. It didn't matter that the prisoner came from the Emperor himself. The whole estate was now in chaos because of her. The deputy commander of the Imperial Order just rolled into the estate. He was quick to greet Count Chrysis. Old friends. Hadn't seen each other in ages. Edmund Milton was genuinely bummed they ran into Count Chrysis under such lousy circumstances. Lazlo cut the small talk and got straight to the point. The deputy commander laid it out. Military law says harassing a servant is a serious offense with harsh penalties. The knights were convinced Lord Croesus would bail them out. But Milton added the request itself wasn't illegal, so they got booted from the order. Lazlo smirked when the knights started screaming about how unfair it was. Edmund Milton told those scumbags to be thankful they didn't get worse. Commander was absolutely horrified. The ex-knights started begging for a second chance, pleading for mercy. She was just a regular maid. Out of nowhere, Edmund Milton brought up the maid, who used to be a duchess. He wanted to apologize to her in the order's name. Lazlo's expression turned grim at the request. The deputy commander said he had no ill intentions. It was the least he could do, apologize. Joseph shouted that this was all Edmund Milton's fault. He personally suggested the three knights ask Captain Crixus to take them in for training. The deputy commander himself said they could see that woman in the mansion. If they couldn't, they wouldn't have come here. The knights couldn't believe they'd been used. They demanded to be released immediately. With a sly smile, Edmund said the captain might misinterpret things if he heard this now. He suggested they go study under Count Crixus. The deputy did this because the knights kept bringing up Count Crixus. Edmund suggested calling in anyone who heard the conversation. As Lazlo suspected, Edmund was goading those idiots. But without proof, he couldn't do a thing. So the Count told the deputy to go back, promising to pass along his apologies to that maid. Edmund, with a smile, asked if there was anything else he needed to do, but Lazlo said no and told the deputy to be careful on the way back. Spinning around, Edmund headed for the carriage. His face twisted with anger in an instant. How dare this idiot act so damn smug in front of him? The captain's spot was supposed to be his. Edmund was a noble who lived by honor, but some scum-sucking mercenary stole his post. The Emperor went soft, handing that idiot a title. And to top it off, Lazlo got his hands on a war relic. Edmund Milton didn't think it was worth his time. But now, he was hooked. The heroine slowly blinked her eyes open. She didn't recognize where she was at first. Celie was sitting nearby, all worked up. And the second Edel opened her eyes, she was on her feet. Edel shot right back. "What am I doing here?" Celie waved her off. "We'll talk later. Hell, you were this close to dying." Then, Celie explained Daisy had been watching over her, until now. The Count already sent for a doctor, and Edel thought that was odd. She'd have preferred hot water over a doctor any day. Out of nowhere, the laundry mistress apologized, left Edel blinking in confusion. Celie figured she should have ignored the headmaid's nonsense. Then none of this would have happened. Even when Edel was called to Lady Linnea, she didn't get in the way. Celie figured greeting guests was way better than doing laundry. But the main character reminded her she'd already stuck up for her more times than she could count, and she was endlessly grateful. But Celie was only doing it to get under Madame Bohyun's skin. A lot of maids came and went, but the head maid was always to blame. Edel had to endure it all just to survive. Celie really wanted to help her and build a real connection, but she always saw Edel as just another maid. She tried to convince herself the ex-duchess could handle it, but the main character said that wasn't true, because only here had she found friends like them. Edel was certain she'd survived this long only because of them. Celie took the main character's hands. She thanked Edel for saying that. The girl offered to keep watching each other's backs, and the main character's face broke into a happy smile. Not long after, Daisy and Lila joined in. This time, the food they shared with friends tasted like a damn feast. If happiness had a taste, it'd definitely be as sweet as the piece of fruit Edel was holding. The girls kept chatting for a long time. 3 days went by at the Cruz estate. The head maid had her pay cut for 2 weeks for turning a blind eye to the messes in the manor. Lady Linnea was locked under house arrest. Daisy told her friend to hold strong and come back soon. Before heading into Count Cruz's office, the main character took a deep breath to steady her nerves. Then she pushed the door open. Lazlo whipped around at the sound. He locked eyes with the main character, studying her in silence for a moment. Silence dropped over the room. Edel had no idea why the Count was staying quiet. Lazlo was furious those 2 morons didn't get executed. His anger made sense. Being insulted over a lowly servant was enough. Edel apologized for her actions. There were plenty of nobles who went through hell because of servant scandals. But Lazlo just looked confused. "What are you even talking about?" The guy didn't get what she could have possibly done. The blame falls on the headmaid and Lady Line, who failed at their basic duties. Edel reminded them Lady Line was still young and had no choice. She's too inexperienced to receive guests. It was her first time, and anyone in her position would have felt scared and anxious in that unfamiliar situation. After all, a young lady isn't a count. Lazlo couldn't believe Edel was defending her now. The main heroine asked the Count to be lenient toward the young, inexperienced lady. She didn't want him to lose a sister like she once did. Lazlo agreed with Edel. If he'd thought clearly, nothing would have happened, and no one would have been punished. The main heroine reminded them it was those knights' mistake, not the Count's. The man sat down and told Edel she'd be working in the kitchen from now on. Laundress wasn't suitable for her. Edel was upset she couldn't work with Celia and Layla anymore. Lazlo noticed she wasn't happy. The lady asked if there was any other punishment besides this, catching the Count off guard and making him freeze for a second. The blonde girl, confused, asked, "Is that not how it's usually done?" In noble families, they usually punish the maid, even if it's not her fault to keep the family's reputation safe. Lazlo snapped, "Are you taking me for an idiot?" Now the Count got why those jerks were so cocky. They thought they were untouchable. Lazlo was barely holding back his rage. He reminded Edel, "I'm a mercenary. I don't know nothing about noble customs," so she could just go for it and not stress over it. At first, Count Christus looked like a heartless guy, but despite his looks, he was probably more level-headed than the other nobles Edel knew. The main character braced herself to ask the Count if other maids could use hot water. Lazlo blinked. "Y'all washing clothes in cold water in this freeze?" Edel nodded. Same with showers. She was surprised he even knew about that. The woman raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ban firewood for heating?" Turns out Lazlo ordered everyone to stock up on everything, because he didn't want the maids using cold water in the middle of winter. He just never actually said it was okay to use hot water. Lazlo didn't even ask the housemaid about it. The Count realized he was the worst damn head of the house, and promised to make sure everyone used hot water starting tomorrow. He thanked Edel with this big, happy grin. The maid gave him a surprised look. She smiled too. Now she wasn't scared of him anymore, and honestly, he looked kinda cute. As promised, Lazlo made good on fixing up the laundry room and bathrooms. Firewood stockpiled until summer. The maids were over the moon about the hot water. The main character was all smiles, seeing their happiness too. Door slams open. Head maid storms in, all riled up, demanding to know who's been lazing around. Boyun's thinking Edel's all about her own comfort. totally oblivious to how others are hurting because of her. Because of her, two women ended up in a real mess. Edel got promoted out of the blue, just because the Count caught a glimpse of her. Still, they're not about to pick a fight with Edel over something stupid. Hell, she's the reason they've got hot water now. The housekeeper froze when she heard that. She'd just found out the Count had stopped by the laundry room recently, surprised they were washing clothes in cold water, even dead of winter. The housekeeper told everyone to hold on, while she went to ask the Count herself. Everyone started thinking the head maid just liked washing in cold water. But she shot that down, saying it might be a misunderstanding. But Edel had just overheard the whole thing from the Count herself. So now they could just be glad about it. The head maid went ballistic, convinced Edel had told the Count on purpose to undermine her. The housekeeper snapped. If Edel messed with the veggies, she'd make her pay. The protagonist told the head chef she couldn't wait to start working with them. The housekeeper was convinced Edel had completely lost it. The blonde figured the estate's owner and his staff had probably been under someone's control the whole time. But Edel was the only one they couldn't fire, so she could report everything if things went south. Right then, Linnea was slumped in her room. She was sure Edel had given up on her too. She just needed to call for help. Turns out the lady was right. She'd never make it as a real noble. Line was sure everything was lost now. The kitchen manager called out to the main heroine. Right then, Edel, focused and with a slight smile, was peeling potatoes, carefully removing the skin. Lola scolded the woman for not cleaning the pot yesterday. She started protesting when the main heroine reminded her it wasn't her duty. Edel simply added with a genuine smile, "No need to be sneaky, just do your duties honestly." She asked Lola not to forget to do it today. Edel wasn't going to be the maid who endures everything anymore. After a while, the main heroine sighed in relief as she finally finished her work. She decided to rest a bit before dinner prep. Kitchen work was just as hard as laundry room work. Edel began to wonder more and more that meeting Celia and Layla in the laundry room was her biggest stroke of luck. But she had to keep striving for her friends. The blonde didn't notice she'd fallen asleep and only woke up when she heard voices outside the door. Madame Boyun asked Bovix cheerfully, "Why are you shaking so much? It's not the first time, no need to worry." The man said the vibe here is off. The woman snapped she'd find a new supplier if this kept up. But Bovix here promised to handle everything, and the head maid praised him, saying he'd always be in the black with her. The main character realized they were siphoning funds. The merchant hesitated to sign the papers, but the head maid's smug attitude gave it away. They were skimming from the estate's funds for sure. Edel vowed this time she'd catch them red-handed. She caught the housekeeper's footsteps, already heading up to the second floor. The head maid probably dropped the receipt off in Count Chris's office and bolted before anyone noticed. Lazlo was at work, so the office was empty. The heroine slipped inside. She muttered an apology to the Count, but this sneak attack was her only shot at catching the crooks in the act. Edel grabbed the store receipt in a flash. It claimed all the veggies were premium quality, but the reality? Total junk. They knew the estate's clueless about quality grades, so they got away with skimming. Edel was wondering where the ledger for all these shenanigans could be. People like this always keep records. They're so obsessed with money, they wouldn't miss a single penny. They probably skimmed way more than just the supplies. Out of nowhere, a girl's voice asked, "Who's there?" Young Lady Line was shocked to see Edel in the hallway. The main character froze in place, like she'd been hit by lightning, unsure how to react to Lean's sudden appearance. Her brain started racing, trying to figure out what to do. She needed to say something, fast. The main character gave the lady a calm hello, but Lean rushed over and snapped, "What are you doing here?" Edel decided to only say what was absolutely necessary right now. She told the lady she'd been worried about her. The main character heard Count Crisis punished you for that whole mess, and I was worried you were okay. That situation was a dead end. She knew Edel was scared too back then. The main character still remembered how badly your hands were shaking before the knights showed up. Line said she was okay. The lady knew Edel had asked her brother to shorten the house arrest. The main heroine hesitated, saying he just asked and he agreed. But apparently, no one had ever dared to do that before. But Lean was about to say something else. Edel was stunned when she suddenly thanked her. The young lady blushed. She was really ashamed to say those words, but they were absolutely necessary. To change the subject, Lean suddenly asked if Edel knew Viscountess Emerson. Edel nodded, and the lady said she'd just gotten a second invite to her party. Surprise flashed across the main heroine's face. Angela complimented Camilla on the lavish hall decor, but the woman told her to wait a bit longer for the real highlight. She revealed she'd invited Lean Crisis. Camilla's cousin said the party would be even more fun now. Lady Line, with hope in her voice, asked the main heroine if she could befriend Viscountess Emerson. Line needed at least one real friend right now. Edel totally got how she felt. She suggested waiting till the third meeting, since people usually just get to know each other in the first two. Linnea was glad she'd asked Edel for advice. The girl caught herself thinking they'd already met 3 times by now. She was super curious what the ex-Duchess of Lancaster thought of her, but still couldn't bring herself to ask. Edel explained to the lady that real friendship takes time and honest effort. But when you find a kindred spirit, you just know. Linnea wondered if she'd ever find one of those. Then she sent the maid on her way. The next day, before young Lady Chrysis hopped into the carriage, her maids wished her luck. The carriage pulled out of the estate grounds. With neither the mistress nor the housekeeper around, the maids decided to kick back. The housemaids were sure that when the lady returned, she'd throw a fit, and better she just stay home if that's how it'd go down. Edel wanted to know how Linnea looked today. Since the last tea party, at least she'd learned to apply makeup right. But the blonde worried she hadn't seen the dress yet. The main character was really hoping nothing went sideways. As evening approached, the carriage rolled back into the estate. The head maid burst into the house and barked at one of the maids to get out in the hallway right away. Mina and the other girls sprinted out right after her. Linnea knocked over a vase and snapped, "Who left this here?" It was already March, but the winter decorations were still up. People might get the wrong idea. The lady also ordered the gardener to be found immediately. Meanwhile, the other maids were sweeping up the broken pieces. Turns out the young lady was just taking out her anger on the maids after some backstabbing comparisons. Someone brave was gonna have to clean the lady's room. The main character raised her hand. Edel stepped in, saw the total mess Linnea had made in her room, but didn't even flinch. She tidied it all up with precision. Linnea suddenly announced she'd been begged to come back tomorrow too. The main character froze mid-broom and realized this tomorrow talk needed her full attention. These people had been tormenting and ignoring Linnea nonstop, but they never laughed in her face. The girl was already starting to think she was to blame for how everyone treated her. Line hated herself for not being able to respond to them. She figured Edel felt the same way about her. The main character stepped up to the young lady, placed a hand on her shoulder, and called her name softly. Edel knew she'd had it rough. Line nodded, then immediately burst into tears. The lady didn't want to wash up or go to bed. She knew tomorrow would bring the same awful party again, but if she skipped it, the gossip would start. She didn't get why she had to go through this. The main character asked Lady Chrysis why she kept accepting all the invitations. Even though Line felt humiliated, she still showed up to these events every time. She replied that if she refused, her brother would be criticized. But Line got criticized either way, whether she showed up or not, and that left the girl feeling utterly desperate. The lady had no idea what to do. Edel said the first step was to rebuild her reputation. It wasn't a problem at all, and Edel promised to spill everything right now if the lady took a warm bath to go over the plan afterward. Angela and Camilla were swapping about Linnea Crésis's ridiculous behavior. They only invited her to the party to fast-track the message that she didn't belong in high society. But Angela figured Count Crisis wouldn't just roll over on this. Camilla was dead certain this airhead would still be glowing tomorrow. Right then, Linnea was soaking in a warm bath with rose petals. Edel's special touch for her. To Viscountess Emerson, this kid was just a laugh. Edel's first tip: pretend everything's peachy, take a deep breath, and just walk in. The girl was sure today would be better than yesterday. Linnea was just glad she managed to plant her butt in a seat without disaster. At the party, focus on yourself, and don't let on that today's mess is stressing you out. This young lady needed to act a little colder toward the side-eye. Linnea debated grabbing a cup of tea. Right then, the musicians kicked off the tunes, and the highborn ladies hit the dance floor with their partners. The girl got the vibe everyone was giving her the cold shoulder, but she kept telling herself she could handle it. Now that Linnea sipped her tea slowly, she realized how good it could taste, so she savored every moment, even as she felt the disapproving eyes on her. As evening set in, two ladies approached the young lady. Smiling, they told her the dress looked amazing on her, showing off her perfect taste and style. Linnea wasn't expecting that, and quickly thanked them for the compliment. The ladies even said she'd picked a stunning necklace. They told Linnea to stick closer to whoever helped her with today's outfit, and offered to leave the event together. At that moment, Viscountess Emerson walked up to Lady Licio and Lady Brunhen and asked if they'd enjoyed the party. The ladies said they'd loved it, but they were already ready to leave. Madame Emerson tried to convince the aristocrats to stay longer, but they declined. Then the Viscountess turned to Lady Chrysis and asked the same. Linnea said she was leaving too, since it was getting late. The woman raised an eyebrow, asking if the event had really not impressed her. Linnea smirked and said she'd been having a blast since yesterday. The ladies had no idea what hit them, and Viscountess Emerson just gaped at the audacity. Lady Licio and Lady Brunin gave Linnea major props for shutting down Camilla Emerson like a boss. They told her to keep serving that same fire response. But honestly, Linnea said it on the fly, no second thoughts. The noble ladies waved goodbye to Lady Chrysis, vowing to meet again soon. Linnea's heart was pounding like crazy. Earlier, Edel had asked, "Who picked out this dress and necklace?" Linnea said it was her, and the protagonist high-fived her, slapping her 5 for looking so elegant. If she rocked the outfit with confidence, she'd outshine everyone. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Imasha always claimed she was too young and clueless about fashion, so the elite would never take her seriously. But the house manager was dead wrong. Linnea's style was way sharper, and she knew how to highlight her best bits. The protagonist told her to hit the mirror, and Linnea nearly choked seeing her reflection. Trusting Edel? Best call ever. Our heroine lost her mind when summoned to the Count's office that night. The housemaster apologized to Edel for calling her in so late and told her she'd be his sister's personal maid starting tomorrow. Edel was so caught off guard by the news. But there wasn't anyone else in the house who fit the bill. Count Croesus apologized again to the young woman for pulling her into his office so late. It was Lynn's idea, she insisted. Lazlo grinned when Edel waved it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. He told his sister straight up, if she caused any more trouble, he wouldn't let her get away with it. Edel had never seen Lynn smile like that before. This was the first time. Count Croesus called his little sister by her pet name, and the heroine's heart skipped a beat. Lynn Croesus would grow up in that manner, cherished and free. Edel pressed her hands to her chest and silently begged her sister, Lynn Canyon, to let her take care of Lady Lynn. This time she vowed she wouldn't look back with regrets. That awkward but totally genuine sibling bond. Edel and Lynn had definitely been there for each other since they were kids. The heroine had older brothers, but there was never much of a connection. They might as well have been strangers. Maybe that was why. They knew that no matter what happened after the wedding, they'd end up going their separate ways. Different families, different lives. The brothers even scolded Edel when she refused to get married. Now that Lynn was gone, Edel had no choice but to immediately agree to this marriage with Lancaster. Count Croesus informed the heroine that her new room would be right next to Linnea's. It was already late, so the lady promised to show her the room tomorrow. Lazlo placed a hand on his younger sister's head, looked Edel in the eye, and said he didn't want to force her. The heroine realized this mansion was now her new home. She said she'd do her best, and the young lady immediately grabbed her hand, overjoyed that she'd finally agreed. Now, she was just Edel. No longer Lancaster, no longer Canyon. The servants hadn't expected Lady Linnea to change so dramatically. It was all thanks to the right makeup. Now, the young lady looked kinder than usual. A change the housekeeper absolutely hated. Looks like Edel was really turning Lady Linnea around. Even the Count admitted. Linnea was a completely different person now. He also noticed Edel looked way better than before, and told her so, smiling warmly. The heroine hadn't expected to hear that. Lazlo was confident this would make things easier between her and Barbara. Edel called out to the Count, and he instantly turned beet red. The guy quickly changed the subject and offered the young woman to continue their conversation from yesterday. He plans to set up a couch and a table in his office later, since they had nowhere to sit right now. Since Edel helped his sister, the Count decided to thank her personally, but the main character replied she didn't do it for a reward. Just a promotion was enough thanks. Lazlo knew his sister wasn't exactly easy to handle, so he asked her to take at least this. Compared to what Edel did, this is nothing. Last night, Linnea stormed into his office and started begging him to hand over Edel, catching the man completely off guard. She told him it was her who dressed her up. Lazlo froze when she said it was the first time she hadn't embarrassed herself. Now the man realized why she'd always been that way. Count Croesus figured her genuine, cheerful personality from childhood would help her fit into any aristocratic circle. He left her to her own devices, trusting she could handle it. Maybe they were already too far apart to fix. That's why Edel became Lazlo's lifeline. The Count wasn't sure his chosen gift would please the ex-duchess, so he asked her to accept a check. Edel replied with a touch of sadness. She didn't need it. Lazlo was stunned by her response. She could have at least bought new clothes and some nice jewelry. She reminded him she couldn't leave the mansion. The Count blinked, confused. How can't you leave? He froze when he realized Edel had always seen herself as a prisoner and servant here. But that wasn't the case. Lazlo had said from the start he was taking her on as a maid. Edel was supposed to get the same pay as the other maids, and the Count had already started to think that wasn't happening. But Edel said she'd been paid, and Lazlo shot back. Then there's no reason for you to lock yourself in this house. The heroine still couldn't believe it. Her face flushed bright red, and her heart started racing. Lazlo always thought Edel was all business, but she had a soft side. Her helping Lene was proof. But at first, the heroine struggled to bring up Line's problems. She couldn't figure out how to calm her wild, pounding heart. Edel finally gathered her thoughts and told them she'd rather not take money. The heroine asked them to believe her words were true. Lazlo immediately said he believed and urged the young woman to just tell him what she wanted. But that was the request. No need to rush, Edel said. I just wanted Lord Crisis to always believe my words, and he agreed. Happy Line showed Edel her invitation to another party. The heroine sincerely congratulated her. The young lady told Edel the room next to hers was already ready, so she could start moving her things over and begin work tomorrow. Line went back to her room, humming some tune. But before she could shut the door, the housekeeper's hand stopped it. The young lady spun around sharply and nervously asked, "Who's there?" Imasha stepped in and guessed the lady had felt awkward without her today. After all, it was her job to look after her. The housekeeper pulled out a new floral powder, but Leen yanked it from her hands and shouted, "I don't need that!" The young lady snapped at the housekeeper. "Do you think I'm some kind of fool for letting you just walk out?" Imasha exclaimed that the powder was recommended by the maids from other houses. But Linya wouldn't hear any of it and ordered the housekeeper out of her room. The head maid stormed out into the hallway, clutching her apron in fury. This whole mess was Edel's fault. But this wasn't over yet. Imasha wasn't about to let things rest. Daisy said through tears that now even her sister was moving away so far, and it really hurt. It looked like Edel was just vanishing, but Edel was glad Daisy was so upset. The main character admitted she felt a little awkward, being in such a nice room all by herself. But her friend shot back that it was only right. After all, Min always had a nice room too, even though she never had a position. The housekeeper assigned rooms however she pleased. Edel was quick to use this as evidence too. Daisy was curious how her friend planned to spruce up the room. Small portraits on the walls were totally in. They say the artist's street is super popular. Honestly, Edel had never even considered that. The main heroine suggested hitting that street next week and grabbing something tasty together. Daisy was all for it. Edel was happy and wished every moment could feel this way. But one day, Ladyline couldn't find her pearl hairpin. She really wanted to wear it today. The blonde guessed it might be in the black box. It wasn't there, so Lean started wondering if she'd put it somewhere else. The main heroine said she'd check the other boxes, and the young lady offered to help. As soon as they started looking, they realized the boxes had a lot of empty spots. Line was sure there should have been earrings and a gold necklace in there too. If just the hairpin was missing, it could have been Line's oversight, but this was outright theft. The young lady ordered everyone to be rounded up immediately. Line and Edel headed downstairs. The house manager announced she'd gathered all the servants per the lady's order. Everyone had to help catch the thief. Imasha pointed to the 3 maids who'd been taking turns cleaning the lady's room. Along with Imasha and Edel themselves, Line ordered a sweep of all these maids' rooms, but the housekeeper said they'd double-check the others just in case. Imashi figured the jewelry could be hidden in their friends' rooms. Edel told the lady, "There's probably nothing to find in those rooms." Line knew her jewelry was probably sold, but right now, she was considering other angles. For fairness, she needed to dig into everything. Edel was glad her mistress had a good nose for it. She could be overly hot-headed at times, but with the right guidance, she could shape up. The housekeeper burst into the hall, beaming, and announced they'd found the culprit. The maids immediately started whispering. The main heroine froze when the head maid pointed at her and declared it was definitely her and her girls. The jewelry turned up in Daisy's, Celi's, and Layla's rooms. The girls were horrified by the accusation. The servants cried out it was a mistake. They didn't even know what the young mistress's room looked like. The girls dropped to their knees, screaming it was a clear frame job. Line herself realized how odd this was. The housekeeper pointed out that these 3 are close to Edel, and since maids don't exactly have spare cash, it's a solid motive. So Edel snatched the jewelry and passed it along to her friends. Imasha burst out, "There's no way it went down any other way." Line was heading out for a quick errand, so everyone, Celi, Daisy, and Layla, could get back to work. The housekeeper had no clue where they were headed. Back in her room, Edel asked Lady Line if she thought she was guilty. Of course Line didn't believe it, but she was curious. How'd Edel keep her cool under such pressure? Maybe that kind of restraint is what makes a real lady. But Edel had no idea what to say. The protagonist admitted she wasn't angry so much as she felt. The moment had finally arrived, but Edel needed solid proof of her innocence. The protagonist had faith in herself. She promised Lady Line she'd find a way to prove it. Proving the young mistress's trust in her was well placed. The Count learned an incident went down while he was out of the house. Edel figured she'd spill everything she knew to him. Lazlo gave the go-ahead. The heroine asked the Count if he remembered how she begged him to trust her instead of those empty promises. Of course, Lazlo remembered, and he still believed in her innocence. But it wasn't about theft. Edel didn't steal a thing. The real issue was what those documents revealed. Stuff she put together from what she saw and overheard. They needed to cross-check those details with the Count's books. Edel pushed for an official investigation, right from Count Chrysis and the Chrysis line. Lazlo asked Edel if this had to do with the head maid throwing theft accusations at her. The heroine nodded. Because of me, Imasha can't manipulate Ladyline or boss the staff around like before. Daisy, Celi, and Layla got dragged into it because she wanted to erase anyone close to Edel. They were stuck with the toughest work because they couldn't pay the dues. Edel had been waiting for this exact moment. Knowing Lazlo Chrysis, he'd definitely caught the weirdness in the estate. And Edel was counting on her testimony to back up his suspicions, but she didn't know if he'd believe her. Lazlo smirked. All my fault. The main character couldn't believe he actually bought her weak arguments, but the Count reminded her he'd promised to trust her. He knew Edel wasn't the type to talk nonsense or chase material gain. She was a valuable person who opened Lazlo's eyes, but the man wanted something in return. With a smile on his face, he asked the former Duchess of Lancaster if she was ready for the fallout. In the end, the accountant and traitor got arrested. The woman kept screaming she was innocent. Count Chrysis coldly ordered the former headmaid to spill exactly what she'd embezzled. But Imasha kept shouting she was completely innocent. But according to the records Nathan found on Imasha Bohun, She was buying cheap goods and passing them off as premium. She also marked up the prices of expensive items. She was skimming profits on the ladies' cosmetics and dresses. The double entry books showed total embezzlement came to about 250,000 lintons. Imasha screamed that running the estate was a heavy burden. She worked so hard these 3 years, so we can turn a blind eye. The Count gave the woman 2 options: go to jail or sign a receipt for 400 coins. Imasha messed up. The stolen amount was way less than that, but the rest was compensation and a payment for her life. Now, the former housekeeper had to make a choice. Daisy asked her sister Cecilia, emotionally, if this meant all the false charges were dropped. The girl nodded and said they didn't have to worry anymore. But another problem popped up. The head maid position was now open, and they had to decide who'd take it next. Lady Linnea couldn't believe they put up with such a housekeeper. Lazlo agreed with his sister. Then he said, for example, the one who exposed all of Imasha's crimes could take the job. From now on, Edel will be the head maid. Lady Linnea couldn't hide her satisfied grin. The main heroine's friends lost it when they heard the awesome news. They were over the moon for Edel. Lazlo asked anyone to speak up immediately if they had any objections. After the storm, the manor fell into a heavy, almost oppressive silence. The guilty ones fled the manor in a hurry, while the innocent took their places. Turns out, Imasha stuck the poor maids in terrible rooms, even though she knew there were plenty of good empty ones in the mansion. The friends decided to help Edel as soon as they wrapped up the move. They'd have to reshuffle responsibilities and hire new staff. Who knew what would have happened if someone else was in Edel's place? Even though the manor's still a mess, just knowing Imasha's finally gone made things feel lighter. The main heroine cracked the door open when she heard the familiar knock. Count Chrysis apologized for the late hour. Edel was so shocked seeing Lazlo, she forgot what to say for a moment and just stared at him, flustered. The man apologized and asked to come in. After deciding to move Imasha out, the Count's mercenaries scoured the connected companies for days. They found hidden double accounting books. Turns out, Imasha hadn't kept any of the books properly, so Edel had to start managing the estate from scratch. But in this mansion without a butler, the heroine had no idea how far she could go. Someone knocked on the door, and Edel assumed it was her friends. It was surprising how many people were stopping by now. If someone had told Edel this 3 years ago, she'd have called their bluff. Turns out it was Count Chrysis. He immediately stammered, all flustered. Don't think anything of it. But Edel hadn't even thought anything like that. The heroine let him in and apologized to the Count for not even having anything to offer him right now. The man calmed her down, saying thanks to her, Lean had become way more lively. Now she kept getting invitations. Edel, with a warm smile, said it was all because of the young lady's cheerful, energetic vibe. Lazlo replied, she's always been that way, I just didn't get it. Everything he couldn't give his little sister in 3 years. Edel changed in just a few months. Now, finally, the long-awaited peace had come. No matter how many times Lazlo thanked her, it'd never be enough. The man told Edel he wanted to ask for her help, not as Count Chrysis, but as himself. Being born as the sister of a brother like him wasn't a choice she had, even if Edel hated and despised him. He asked her to take care of their sister, but the main heroine told the Count she didn't see him the way he thought. He probably didn't want a trophy like her. An artwork or jewel would have suited the Count better. Lazlo replied that the Emperor gave him the most valuable prize of all. Edel stared at him, surprised. She thanked the Count for his words. Then the main heroine whispered that no one ever thought a traitor's wife would have the guts to live. If the Count hadn't taken you in as a maid, you'd probably be 6 feet under by now. He knew how heavy it all was on your shoulders. But if you keep living, good days will come. So don't waste time thinking about death. Edel nodded in agreement. Tears began to fall from her eyes. They always told the main heroine to suppress her emotions and hide her true feelings. Showing her weaknesses wasn't something she could do easily. But she was crying now, not trying to hide it, saying she just wanted to live a totally normal life. Lazlo pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. The heroine took it right away. The guy didn't judge her for showing weakness in front of him. He figured being normal was really hard for her. The question was, what else could go down if Edel cried again in front of someone who'd already seen her vulnerable? But the handkerchief he handed her radiated this warm, comforting vibe. Edel really wanted a normal life, a normal family, normal love and friendship. Those had always been the hardest, most out-of-reach dream for her. She decided to wash the handkerchief and return it tomorrow for sure. In the end, Edel slept the whole night through without dreams. She had to get ready and grab breakfast in the morning. Starting today, her new job had her swamped. The housekeeper reshuffled duties based on the maid's requests. Till new staff got hired, it'd be rough. But Edel hoped everyone had pushed through with fresh motivation. Lady Line had something else to say too. She admitted she'd been super stressed out the whole time from the pressure, even though Imasha was pulling their strings. Line apologized to the maids for causing them so many problems. Now her main goal is to run the Chrysis estate without any shame. With Edel's help, they could finally give it their all. Then she apologized to Edel's friends for not clearing the false charges off them sooner. But the girls were happy to stay in the estate. The maids thanked their mistress for the new rooms. Line laughed, happy and hopeful about everyone working in her house now. Now the Chris's estate was starting over. After such a stressful time, Daisy's promised day off had finally arrived. So much had happened in those days, and finally, they could rest. Edel was happy she'd kept her promise. They stepped outside, where aristocrats were strolling around. Daisy asked her sister if she wanted to go anywhere. The protagonist said she spotted a clothing store and realized she needed to buy some casual clothes. Daisy smiled and suggested going there first. The main character froze when she overheard her name from a passerby. Edel stopped and spotted a dark-haired aristocrat staring at her in surprise. That was Lady Lucille Arton. The aristocrat immediately called over her friends to point Edel out. Daisy started panicking, but the main character told her it was all good. They just needed to say hi and keep moving. A guy suddenly snarked, "Can a criminal even be out here?" Edel was in a fancy outfit, and they started thinking she'd stolen it. If the ex-duchess had half a shred of shame, she'd be 6 feet under with the rest of the traitors. A lot of people in Edel's place would have picked a dignified death. The main character calmly said Count Crixus had let her out, so they'd better back off. These guys weren't different from Amashi. All they wanted was to cause pain and watch someone cry. So the key was not biting into their bait. Edel did a little curtsy and wished them a nice stroll. But the guys sneered she was clearly some mercenary's mistress, which explained her confidence. Should have figured it out when she started calling that commoner a count. Edel asked herself if she could take the slams anymore. Suddenly, Count Crixus showed up and said he had no idea he had a mistress right by him. The aristocrats fell silent instantly, stunned by the captain of the guard's sudden arrival. Edel didn't get why Count Crixus was here right now. Actually, it wasn't just Edel and Daisy who came here. Count Crixus and his sister had also decided to check out the street food spot. After Lazlo became a noble, he was stuck eating all that fancy gourmet stuff. But this was actually what he needed most. Linnea suddenly asked if it was true they'd become orphans 16 years ago. Lazlo was caught off guard, but the girl said she was just curious. How could a kid take care of another kid? He said they survived the best way they could, but Linnea demanded he stop dodging the question. She couldn't really remember the house they'd lived in as kids. Her parents' faces? Gone from her memory long ago. Linnea was too young back then, so she wanted to know more about the life she and her older brother had shared as kids. Turns out, they'd lived in a cozy, happy home before. But that normal life was shattered in an instant. Lazlo ran through the woods flat out, carrying his little sister on his back as she cried and called for their parents. He vowed he'd protect her, at all costs. They could come for the kids any moment, so they kept running while they still had the strength left. But his hands were too weak to carry Lene anymore. If they could find a safe place to stay together, life would be so much easier. One morning, a sudden blinding light hit Lazlo. The grandmother who'd given them a meat pie days earlier found them and asked if they'd been hiding out there for days. The kind woman offered to take them in, maybe because of the days on the run. But Lazlo instinctively felt they could trust her. The grandmother said they lived with her husband and would be happy to take someone in. Lazlo was doing all this for a safe future with Line. Now, names or past didn't matter, so the kids could build their own safe, happy world. When someone showed up to watch over Line, Lazlo started working for a living and slowly took up a sword. Those old folks cared for people with love, and the kids were truly happy in their home. Line remembered her grandfather and grandmother clearly. She guessed her brother didn't remember their parents either, and the man said their house was cramped, but a good one. Even though Line didn't remember her parents' faces, she'd never forget the taste of her grandmother's meat pie. But the Line family's current house was starting to grow on her too. Now she suggested checking out the area beyond the bridge. And there, after walking all that way, the heroes ran into their steward. Being publicly insulted right then and there, anger lit up the brother and sister's faces instantly. They couldn't believe someone would say stuff like that about Edel. Nobles thought a woman who happily married an old man was super dangerous. Lasso couldn't take it anymore. He snapped at them right away. "What do you think you're doing?" At that moment, 4 jerks were spreading nasty rumors they had zero clue about. The men said the captain of the guard wouldn't dare threaten people, but Lasso figured a commoner acting so politely was weird. He declared Edel was a key part of the Count's family and demanded an apology for the slander right then. Lasso asked Edel if she remembered the names of all the jerks who insulted her. The men and women apologized to the Count on the spot and promised it wouldn't happen again. The captain of the guard didn't want to make things worse, but he wasn't sure how Edel would take it. Then the aristocrats bowed to the heroine and offered their apologies. Edel's brows furrowed, but she accepted their apologies from the ladies and their gentlemen. They hurried off without another word. The young lady was furious that the nobles dared to slander Edel. Daisy suddenly ran into her father. Edel explained to Lena that they'd come to sketch Daisy's portrait when they bumped into familiar faces. Lena wanted to sketch a portrait with her brother too. She said her brother was always deployed to war. You never knew when he might get killed by accident. The young lady didn't want to forget the people she loved anymore. That kind of worry was normal for her family. But the young man only just realized how much Lena tensed up whenever he left. Even though Lazlo thought he was pathetic, he and Edel had something in common. The hardest part was pretending to live a normal life. Daisy was confused. Edel had already agreed to go with someone, but she'd missed the start of the conversation since she was standing far away. The artist greeted the guests. A proper aristocratic portrait usually takes over a month, but the Count heard pastels here get done fast. Commoners started sketching portraits, copying the nobles' style. The heroine figured the nobles wanted cheap, fast portraits now. At least they finally decided to get a portrait done. But Lean thought her older brother looked terrible. He needed a shave and a proper haircut. Edel told Daisy she'd cover the portrait costs herself. An artist approached the siblings and asked if he could give them a tour. The students could handle the ladies. They were pretty skilled, so no worries. Daisy had never done this before. She was totally nervous. Edel told them to pretend they were just relaxing together. The heroine had only ever had one portrait done, after she married Lancaster Duke, but it burned years ago, so this would be Edel's only portrait ever. Not long after, everything was set. The young artist was blown away by Edel's beauty and offered her an acting career. She said no, but he kept pushing. With looks like that, tickets would sell out just from her walking on stage. Lazlo touched the artist's shoulder and coldly asked him to paint another portrait. The Count wanted his driver, Marco, to be painted with his daughter. Out of the blue, Lazlo asked the artist to paint a second portrait, this one featuring Edel alone. The heroine was stunned by the request. The man told Edel that Duchess Celestine keeps asking about her, so he thought to send a portrait. The blonde thanked him for looking out for her. Meeting Barbara was the last thing Edel ever imagined. She thought she was happy already, but turns out there was still room to hope for something better. Today was a hell of a day. The Count offered the girls a ride back in the carriage, but they declined, saying they wanted to keep shopping. The Chris's family wished them a good time. Edel suggested browsing a few more stores. Lazlo was glad he pulled off a portrait with Linya and gave Marco a solid gift. Even got an Edel portrait done. Had to send it to Duchess Celestine to show her friends doing just fine. But Lazlo just didn't feel like doing it, so he figured he'd keep it for a while. He argued it'd feel weird to send something like that without a heads up. After a wild event-filled weekend, Nathan's new staff showed up. Now that Edel's the house manager, they needed a personal maid for the lady. She asked her friends, but they said no. So the heroine picked two good fits from the new and existing staff. Then she found another solid candidate. Edel suggested splitting the stuff into what to toss and what to sell, and Daisy asked if she could handle it. The heroine told her not to stress, promising to help and explain everything. Daisy, eyes full of fire, vowed to do her best. Since the young lady's gonna be meeting all sorts of people, Daisy's kindness will help shape her personality. Daisy's only ever hung around way older folks, so the heroine hoped they'd help each other out, even with the social gap. Edel said a tailor's coming by after lunch. Just like the house manager said, the Dynamis tailor showed up soon after. Linya wanted to order one of each, a walk dress, a picnic dress, and an evening gown. The woman suggested picking from the catalog and taking measurements right away. Linya asked the housekeeper for advice, and the seamstress just confirmed the rumors that Lady Croesus relies on the head maid for everything. So that means any dress can fetch a high price. Linya liked one dress, but the seamstress suggested checking out another option. It was a new teen-style dress design that was blowing up among girls her age. Linya didn't buy what the woman said. Edel realized the seamstress was trying to clear out dead stock. The woman tried to push a white muslin dress, but Linya snapped the catalog shut. No way she needed that. She decided to order only the dress she'd picked out earlier. The seamstress, confused, asked if Lady hadn't just planned to order 3 dresses, but Linya decided to table it for later. The Countess's sister shot back. "Is your taste really that bad?" The woman forced a laugh and suggested taking measurements. Now, Linya could handle things on her own, quickly regaining her lost confidence and staying on top of her studies. In all this, Edel decided to stick by her side. Line made her first successful resale. The young lady pointed out another item and told the merchant to add it to her total. Line told Edel it was a gift for her. The main character raised an eyebrow. "You're not buying this for yourself?" she asked the young lady. Line replied, "Only people who work hard should use stuff like this." This merchant was a gossip magnet, so spreading the word would boost Line's rep. The merchant saw the lady as caring and a solid business partner. Line didn't care about the gossip. She just wanted to give Edel the gift. The main character took it, thanked my lady, and Line told her to use it well. Now Edel had another precious item. The main character's room was overflowing with gifts and letters from dear friends. She decided to jot it down in today's journal. Last weekend, they grabbed journals from Galantery. Edel wanted personal entries, not just daily notes. She wanted to capture every single memory created in that manner. Suddenly, Line burst into the room. Milady took Edel by the hand and said she had a request. Out of nowhere, she asked the main heroine to look after her older brother, Count Chrysalis. Edel's eyes went wide in shock. This incident happened the same day at noon at the Bruxen Manor. Lady Linnea received another compliment on her stunning look, and she quickly thanked them in return. Linnea also gave a compliment to Jeremina Bruxon, who had invited her for tea. Lady Crisclus was introduced to the Duchess Bruxon's granddaughter. There were no unpleasant people in this place. At other parties, people still glared at Lady Crisclus sideways. But here, everyone was friendly. Out of the blue, one of the ladies asked why the Count hadn't shown up at the parties, and Linnea replied he was super busy. One of the misses admitted the Count seemed kind of scary. She begged Linnea not to take it the wrong way. After all, he had to look intimidating as the king's knight. The lady meant the Count seemed cold or unapproachable. Miss Linnea could help her brother out, since he needed to marry soon too. They say the truth shines brightest when said without bad intentions, and now Linnea got it. The real problem wasn't her. Most nobles judge you by your face and who you know. Linnea couldn't handle her brother's stubbornness, so she asked Edel to help him change so he could finally get married and make some real friends.